So whenever we are looking at board games, we are looking at mainly two prerequisites. Okay, before we actually decide on teaching a child a particular board game, we need to understand what are the demands of the games. Okay, and which would mean like we have to understand the game because every game is unique. Every game has its own set of demands. We should identify what are the components that are involved. Now the components, when I'm talking about components, I'm not talking about intelligence. I'm talking about the processes that are important. For example, certain skills, certain games require us to have a better eye-hand coordination. Okay, for example, if you're looking at a Ludo or a dice, you have to roll the dice. Okay, now that is a physical aspect of it, which is not directly related to the cognition. Okay, so there could be certain games which require us to uh, balance certain things. Okay, so it depends on what kind of game. For example, carom board, we're looking at so then we have to have a better eye hand coordination when you're talking about carom board. We should need to have a better motor planning. We should know how much force has to be applied when you're hitting the coin with a striker and all of that. So every game requires certain skill sets, okay, which is what I call as components. And then there is also a cognitive aspect of it. Okay, so cognitive aspect involves more about the rules of the game and when do you win, when do you lose, and all of that. So that would be the two main aspects that we are looking at. And so today my discussion is predominantly going to be keeping the snakes and ladder as an example, because when I talk about generic about board games, it would be very difficult for me to cover all of that within an hour. So today my discussion is going to be snakes and ladders. Why I chose snakes and ladders? Because this is a very simple game to look at, but again, once we start teaching a child, we'll understand like it's anything which is simple is not so simple. Okay, and so that would be my first time, and then whatever strategies that I'm going to discuss today, probably we can look at some of the strategies we can use for other games as well. Okay, is it fine with all of you? And probably at the end of the session, after this today's session, I may take a few questions regarding some other games that you might have questions, and then we can probably find out like how can we adapt those games or how can we teach the rules of the game to the child. Is that fine? Shall we proceed? Please
Yes,
type
sir.
yes in the chat box. Please type yes in the chat box. Let me see some activity in the chat box. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So the components. What do you mean by prerequisite? A prerequisite essentially means that these skills should be present in the child. If the skill is not present, then we might not choose that particular game. So that is something that we have to be aware of, and we have to also understand that not every child can play every other game in the world, right? Now we also don't do that. We also, all of us have certain preferences. We may know how to play a lot of games, but we are not interested. Okay, some of us, there are many of us who like chess, but then many of us who don't like chess. Even though they know how to play the game, they feel it's slow, it's so boring, and they don't spend time on that, right? So each of us have our own preferences, and each of us have our own level of understanding. So which means that when we are going to teach a game to a particular child, then we have to understand that this child have a is he ready to learn the skills? That's what we mean by prerequisite. Is the child ready to learn a particular game? Okay, and then so again, looking at snakes and ladders, I'm looking at some components which are required for snakes and ladders. We want the child to pay attention. Again, I'm not including the cognitive aspect. Okay, even though you can talk about following instructions can be cognitive, but this is a very basic when you look at the cognition. So I assume that the child is able to do that. So the child should be able to sit, pay attention, and the child should have eye-hand coordination, essentially to take his coin and then take coin or counter, whatever you can call that, and then move it through boxes and place it exactly in a particular box. Okay, that's what I mean by eye-hand coordination there. And the child should be able to follow two-step instructions. Let me mute everybody. I'm hearing some background noise. If you want, probably at the end of the session, please do not post any questions in the chat box. We can have a separate session after the question answer after this particular session. So when I'm looking at attention, is the ability to focus selectively on a selected stimulus, on a particular stimulus. So the child should be able to focus on that, sustain that focus, and shifting at will. Okay, so attention doesn't mean that I have to keep staring at a particular object. I'm free to look around and see what people are doing and all of that. But what is important for me is that I should understand that I am doing a task and I have to complete the task before I move to another task. That's what I mean by attention. So its attention is fine as long as it is just, it's still in the back of your mind that you are still you have not completed the particular task. Okay, so is this clear? Okay, so which mean what I mean is attention is not something which is looking at one particular object all the time and not even turning around to see who's next sitting next to me. So that cannot be called as attention. Attention is the idea that I have to stay put with a task till completion. Okay, please type C if you're clear with that. Okay, now because what we call it as adaptive, we have to be adaptive as well. For example, I just got a glass of water next to me now, and somebody opened the door and kept it to me. I saw who opened the door, and then I just continued with my discussion here. So what is happening here? I am aware that something is changing around me, so I have to shift my attention. It is not that anybody can come, whatever may happen, I'm not going to look at that. That cannot be the case. Okay, and then once I'm able to do that, I come back to the discussion because I understand that this is more important than that. Yeah, that's what I mean by shifting at will. And attention is important to learning, and we have in the past in many programs we've discussed about attention. So let me just, for those who are new today, let me probably give a quick recap of that. There are two types of distraction. So attention, we are talking in terms of distraction. What is distraction? Is the opposite of attention. So there can be two types of distraction. One is an internal distraction and one is an external distraction. If you're looking at internal, I am not able to concentrate. Okay, it can be unrelated to the environment. It's because it's not something related to the environment, something related to myself. Okay, it could be like I'm not interested, I don't know how to play, I'm not able to understand the rules of the game, I'm not confident that I can do that. Or it could also be like other reasons, like I'm feeling sleepy, I'm hungry. So that is internal distraction. Okay, and please type I if you're clear with this. I for internal distraction. Okay, this is something not related to the environment, it's related to myself. Okay, it could be related to the task, it could be related to lack of understanding, it could be related to some physiological reasons as well. And when I'm looking at external distraction, I'm looking at something which is distracting me from outside. So there is something competing stimulus in the environment which is actually catching my attention. I want to talk to you, somebody's constant, there's loud television in the next room, and so I'm getting distracted with that. Okay, so that could be external distraction. The causes include lack of goal or path or purpose as well as responsibility, or sometimes it is just like the other thing is more interesting than what I'm doing right now. And generally speaking, children live for the moment. Okay, they don't think too far ahead, like why I should be learning, why I should be writing. And so they, at the moment, what is more important to me, watching rhymes or a cartoon or writing? So I would obviously choose writing, because I mean I would obviously choose watching a television or YouTube, because that is more interesting for me. Okay, so if there is something else which is more interesting than what I'm doing right now, it will add on to, it will make me focus on that and lose focus on the current task. And this can be overcome only when the child understands responsibility, that this is my work, this is something that I have to do. And so that is the only way I would say, because external distraction is going to be there everywhere. Okay, and we, to start with, we can create an environment where the external distraction is minimal, so the child understand the rules, because you need attention even to understand the rules of the game, right? So we have to create an atmosphere where the child is able to pay attention and learn. But once the child is able to understand the rules, the demands of the task, then the child should be able to do that in externally distracting environment. Okay, and where it is important for a child to understand responsibility, that this is my work, this is something that I have to do, and that is something that we have to focus on. Please type E if you're clear with the external distraction. And if you have any questions related to the slides, you can please put it in the chat box, as I'm looking at the chat box simultaneously. Don't ask questions related to HIM, just have questions related to the slides. So some ways to overcome external distraction would be a distraction-free environment and avoiding multiple stimuli, which means like too many things at the same time, playing with a cluttered desk, too many objects around, which is not allowing me to stay focused or organized. Or in an open room where a lot of people are moving around, that is a lot of distraction, as well as television or something which is much more interesting for me, which is actually easy. It is more easy to overcome external distraction because the child inherently has the ability to concentrate. It is the external, the environment that is not allowing the child to concentrate. So once we're able to control the environment, the child is able to concentrate. So I see that there are a lot of children with ASD who are able to spend, like say there's some parents tell me they're able to spend like hours together playing with the wheels of the car, or they're lining up toys or puzzles, right? So then it, and what is very classical with autism is that we see if they're interested they can have a very good attention for 1 hour or 2 hours, but if you're not interested, not even 5 seconds. Do you agree with me on that? Please type A if you agree with me on that. If something is interesting for children, there is, not for everybody, I'm talking about some group of children who have very good attention span. Okay, but so even in that attention span, it's kind of divided attention, because then what is happening is if it's interesting, they spend hours together. If it's not interesting for them or they're not motivated enough, then not even 5 seconds. Okay, that clearly tells us that this child has an attention span which is kind of intrinsic. The child has that in him or her to pay that attention. It is just that the child does not understand the demands of the task, does not understand what is expected out of him, and so the child is not able to concentrate, or the child does not like the particular activity. And so which means that external distraction is relatively easy to overcome because we have to work only on the outside, not on the inside. But whereas internal distraction is much more challenging, because now the child is not able to concentrate, the child is not ready to concentrate. Okay, so that is a bigger issue, because now when, if it is external distraction, you will find that probably at some point of time when the elders are watching television at home, mostly in the evenings, then the child is not able to concentrate. At least at other times of the day, you have the time to engage the child meaningfully, and the child gives a good attention span. Okay, but what happens with an internal distraction? Now this internal distraction is going to affect everything the child does. It could be academics, it could be playing with puzzles or building blocks, it could be coloring, it could be speech and language, it could be anything, where, because attention is the basis of learning anything new. Yeah, so you will find that the internal distraction is a bigger issue. Do you agree with me on that? Yeah. um, Please type agree if you're okay with that, because a lot of A already. Internal distraction is a bigger concern than external distraction. Yeah, and so we have to work on a different aspect, different road, because when you're looking at external distraction, we're working on the environment, but here we have to work on the child as well as other things related to the child. So you will find that we have to establish routines, that is the first thing. And then if the child is under the impact of medicines, then it's important that we have to understand that, because many children take medicines for seizures, some children take medicines for hyperactivity. Now, there's a big difference here. When we talk about medicines for seizures, generally what will happen is the side effect is drowsiness. Okay, it makes the child feeling drowsy. Now, this child, because of the medicine, is going to feel drowsy. So, and typically it's like twice a day medicine. So, if the child has medicine in the morning, then let's say in the 9 in the morning, then probably till 11 or 12, the child is going to be drowsy. After that, the child is much in a better frame of mind to focus and attend to a particular task. But and so probably we have a window around 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. till the next dose, after which again the medicine is going to be given. So that is a good window period for us to work with a child, and that is the time when most of the intervention should happen. Okay, whereas for a child with hyperactivity, now this child is hyperactive and running around, and he is given a medicine, let's say if it is twice a day again. So he's given a medicine at 10 in the morning. So the effect of the medicine will be till 1 p.m. Now, for this particular child, this 10 to 1 is the ideal time for working with the kid, because now the medicine is going to help the child to sit and concentrate and focus on a particular task. And now he's ready to do that. So when I was working in Spastic Society, and there was one kid who had medicine in the morning, but he came for sessions in the afternoon, and the effect was kind of gone by that particular time. So then we had to rework on that as well, the timings given for a particular child. And sometimes we don't even ask the parent, or the parent doesn't tell us that this child is under medication or what time is it and all of that. Then we might pretty much lose the window period that is important to get the maximum results. Is that clear? Please type M in the chat box if you're clear with the medicine aspect of it. M in the chat box. Yeah. And there could be other issues like constipation, which is very common in children with autism. Like more than 30% of children with autism have gut-related issues, and then other health issues. It could be many children have some skin dysfunctions. All of that, if they become itchy, eczema, and all of that I've seen, and so which can also have an impact on the later because they become irritable. They're not able to concentrate. And I would also focus on the last thing, which is like they are not able to understand expectations from the self. And I would say this is the biggest uh, problem. Okay, in the problem in the sense it is easily correctable. Okay, I see that whenever we are expecting a child to do something, the child, if the child understands what am I supposed to do, the child is more likely to cooperate rather than the other way around. Okay, it's more not an issue with attitude, it is more an issue with lack of understanding. Okay, because it may not reflect directly on cognition, because the cognition can still be good, but because there are language delays, language instructions, verbal instructions are not enough for the child with autism to actually understand what is being expected from me, what am I supposed to do. Okay, and so whenever we give activities, whenever you have any task, always start with a demonstration. Okay, show the child what has to be done, and always make sure that you hold the child and do it once or twice before you actually start giving verbal instructions. So I would always recommend start with visual instructions. Demo is a visual instruction, hand holding is a physical prompt. Start with these two things and then go to verbal instructions rather than starting from verbal instructions. Okay, so when you start with verbal instructions, then the child has a language delay, child is not able to understand, then you think that the child is not cooperative and all of that, then it kind of leaves a very bad taste. Whereas if you start focusing on these things, and you will be pleasantly surprised that the child is able to focus much better and is understanding much better, and suddenly you realize that my child knows so many things just after you see that he is able to just understand the instructions. So this, I would say, would be the easiest way to teach a child. However severe the child's level of cognition, intelligence, how much poor the child is, every child will learn through routines. Okay, so what is a routine? A routine is a combination of fixed time, fixed place, fixed activity. Okay, now we are talking about a child who is not cooperative, who has a very low intelligence, and probably also has poor language processing. Okay, so we're looking at a child around that. Now, if even with those children, it is possible, and it's easy actually. It's not just possible; it's easy to teach the child through routines, because even so children with such a low profile always understand that they have to. I mean, they understand when the father is going to work. They understand like what time he will be back, whatever particular program is going to be telecast on television, because every program has its own. Let's say we talk about a mega serial, we talk about a news item, then there is a specific background music, there's a specific intro title song, everything that they actually know exactly what time it's going to come. And how do they know all these things? It's through routine. Okay, so what I suggest here is that when I talk about a fixed time, place, and activity, it's like it's a set. Okay, it's a set. When I say it's a set, we should not disturb the set. For example, a child, if there are two restrooms, okay, one should be used for bathing, one should be used for toileting. Okay, so the child, if you take the child to the first restroom, the child knows it's time for bathing. If you take the child to the other restroom, the child knows it's time for toileting. Okay, it's for like urine or passing stools. And you use wash basin only for brushing teeth. Okay, bed is only for sleeping. Okay, so when you have very specific, so it's a place. So bed is a place, wash basin is a place, or restroom is a place. Now you relate that with the time, morning time, afternoon time, evening time, whatever it is. Like night time, you go to the bed, then it's only for sleeping. Okay, and then the activity, sleeping is the activity. So it's a combination of time, place, and activity. So whenever, for example, a child does more than one thing in the same place, for example, jumping on the bed, okay, at 11 p.m. when you take the child to the bedroom, the child wants to jump on the cot, whereas it's like you're all completely tired and you want to go to sleep, and the child does not understand that. So that creates a conflict because child has something else in mind. You want the child to do something else. Okay, but the best way is never allow. So never do more than one activity in the same place. This is for children with low intelligence. Never do more than one activity in the same place. Okay, wash basin is only for brushing teeth. Bed is only for sleeping. Okay, just like I constantly give an example. Can you tell me when would you use umbrella? Can you just put it in the chat box? When do you use umbrella? Look in the chat box. When do you use umbrella? When it rains. Okay. Do you use umbrella only when it rains? Yeah. So you get rain as well as sunny, right? So we also use it when it is hot outside, and for some reason we are not using a cap when we want a umbrella. So with a child with special needs with low intelligence, I would suggest do not use umbrella when it is hot and sunny. Use it only for rains. Okay, and use cap for summer. So the child understands I have to use the. Now if you teach two things to the child, now it's causing confusion. Okay, so that's what I mean by routine. So when you create a routine, like place your footwear here, have food in this particular place in a dining table. Okay, you have to sit on a table and chair to do your academic work. You sit on the floor to do some desktop activities. So when you have very clear places, okay, for different activities, then when you take the child there, it's very obvious to the child, this is what I'm supposed to do. Is that clear? Please type C in the chat box. Yeah. Okay. So thank you. And so the next thing, so we have discussed about attention. The second thing is about setting tolerance. So focus on target-based approach versus time-based approach. Again, for new parents, instead of looking at time that the child has to sit for 30 minutes or 1 hour or 20 minutes or 10 minutes, always focus on target. The child has to sit to do this complete task. The child has to fix five pieces of a puzzle. Okay, a child has to do 5 pieces of a building block. A child has to color 1 page. Okay, or a child has to copy 5 words. Child has to do 2 sums. So that's a target-based approach. Once you make it clear, you will find that the child's attention improves, sitting tolerance improves. And I always believe that sitting tolerance improves attention span rather than the other way around. Okay, if the child is able to sit for 10 seconds, then he is able to pay attention for 10 seconds. So sitting tolerance will come first rather than the attention. So, and because it is physical, it's easier to make a child sit rather than make a child pay attention. Okay, we always say you can take a horse to the river, but you cannot make the horse drink. Okay, so taking the horse to a river is like sitting tolerance. Okay, you can make the child sit, it's easier, but making the child attend, it depends on the target. Okay, so focus on target, it makes it easy for a child to understand that. And then we're looking at eye-hand coordination, which is like we look at so how can I improve eye-hand coordination for the child, or does the child have the eye-hand coordination as a prerequisite? If not, how can I improve that? I can use visual demands. So some ways to improve eye-hand coordination would be any task which has a visual demand improves eye-hand coordination. If I can do a task without looking at what I'm doing, then it will not improve eye-hand coordination. Okay, for example, I'm taking a phone, I'm talking to somebody. Okay, when I'm talking to somebody, I'm not looking at the phone. And when the phone is on the table, I don't have to even look at it. I know it's there. So I can just pick it up and talk to somebody. Okay, when I'm looking at something else, I'm having a cup of coffee, right? I may look at it when I'm picking it up, but once it is in my hand, I don't have to look at my cup. Okay, I'm just going to have a cup of coffee. I'm not going to read a newspaper, right? So there is no visual demand. Okay, please type VD if you're clear with this. Visual demand. So how can we improve eye-hand coordination? That would be by creating a demand. If I don't look at it, I cannot do that. Okay, that's what I mean by visual demand. So example would be sorting. Okay, if it's just collecting from one basket to another, I can look somewhere else and drop it. But if I have to sort out, there are two groups of things. I'm doing sorting. I have to look down there. Okay, so that would be increasing a visual demand. The second way of improving eye-hand coordination would be interacting with moving objects. If it is stationary, as I told you, the phone is stationary, the cup is stationary, I don't have to look at it. But if I have to interact with a moving object, like catching a ball or popping a bubble or hitting a balloon, right? So then what will happen is it becomes easy for me now because I have to see it. Because it's not going to stay in a particular place. Only if I'm able to track it, I'm able to successfully interact with that. Okay. Please type I if you're clear with this interaction with moving objects. Rather than I would say M. Okay. M for moving. So if you have to improve attention along with eye-hand coordination, we have to interact with moving objects because they are not static, they are dynamic. Okay. Then we are also looking at precision tasks. Precision tasks would be tasks which are very minute, which requires attention. Okay. For example, your beads, threading the beads would be an example for precision tasks. It could also be a game like Battleship, which has many small holes and pegs, which you use uh, as a game. Then you will use that in a Battleship. And then there is other game called, I call it as landmine game. And what I do is I just put cones. These cones are essentially the ones which have been used by a tailor. Okay, they are, the thread actually comes in a cone. Okay, on a stand like cone. I use that on the floor, and then I make the child walk across that, and the child should not knock it off. Okay, that's why I call it as a landmine game. Now the child has to look down because many parents tell me that child is not looking on the floor. The child has to look down now because if he knocks it down, then he has to redo the task. Okay, so that would be precision. These tasks require precision, and that will improve attention as well as eye-hand coordination. Okay, please type P if you're clear with that. The task, it is not moving. Remember, these tasks are not a landmine game or the Battleship. It is not moving, it's static, but the demand is higher. That is what I mean by precision task. And the fourth would be feedback dependent activity. Now let's imagine like this. I have to look at something, I have to do something. The task is not demanding. Okay, now bubbles can be a moving object also. But what is happening to the bubble when I pop it? It vanishes in thin air. Okay, now that is a feedback that I'm getting. Okay, so if I do something, if I get a feedback, I'm more likely to watch it. Okay, and then I have to look at it and do it. Okay, that's what I mean by feedback dependent activity. So when I touch something, now there are certain lights I've seen like plasma light. When you touch, it forms a kind of a lightning kind of thread on the glass. Okay, or sometimes it's like bubbles. You touch it, it vanishes in thin air. Yeah, so those kind of feedbacks improves your focus on that. And then you have those sliding objects. When you slide a car on one side, it will just go around and then fall in along the tray. Have you seen those kind of things? So those kind of things will all improve your feedback, because now it's a feedback dependent activity, and then you will start looking at it more often because this is something new, this something is happening, something is changing. Okay, and so that's why I like magnets a lot more. Okay, magnets, because it's not easy to stick something on the wall. Okay, so magnet and sticker, this would be two things which you can stick on vertical surfaces. Okay, on the wall, on the nail, or on a iron almirah, or some kind of the door latches. Yeah, so you use all of that where the magnets can stick. Now that is something which can also make it interesting. So these are feedback based activity. If you're clear with that, please type F for feedback. Yeah. And then what is the child's level of following instructions? And most of the games, as you could see, the child should be able to follow at least two-step instructions. The one-step instruction would be give this, take this, drop it, and all of that. And then two-step instruction would be take this ball, keep it inside the box. Okay, you're giving two steps. Three-step is take this ball, keep it inside the box, and close the box. Okay, close the lid. And then could be multiple step as well. So the child should be able to follow at least two-step instructions to be able to play a board game. And so these are some generic feedback which are component based. Now when I'm looking at cognition based prerequisite for snakes and ladders, then I'm looking at, obviously it's something to do with numbers and counting. So I have to start with academic concepts. The child has to identify numbers in the first place. The child should know what does 12 look like, how does 25 look like, and all of that. And then the child should be able to count. And this, now as you understand, the child has to count only 1 to 6. Okay, because that is the face value of a dice. Okay, it's only 1 to 6. So you don't have to, the child may not have to count 20 or 50. just 1 to 6 would be enough. And that is one of the reasons snakes and ladders is easier to teach relatively. And then the child should be able to correlate number in the dice with the moving coin. Okay, so once you have thrown a dice, it's 4, so I have to move 4 paces. So these are the concepts that you have to teach. And child also have to understand big number and small number, because then you have to go from 1 to 50 or 100. So that would be an ascending order, right? So that is something the child has to be aware of, that I have to move, that I should not go in the opposite direction. Is this clear? Is this clear? So if the prerequisites are not present, then you might have to teach the prerequisites in less demanding tasks. Okay, for example, popping bubbles versus catching a ball. So I cannot involve the child in a game of cricket or ball catching like that, because child does not have the prerequisites. I have to develop that prerequisites. So what it means that then how can I do that? I cannot use the same task, but I can use the same work on the same ideas with a less demanding task, because here when you look at bubbles, it is going to move slowly through the air. It's giving me more time to respond, and then when I touch it, it's giving a feedback that it's vanishing in thin air, and all of that is making it interesting. Yeah, and then the child is able to look at it, eye-hand coordination, attention, everything improves on that. So if you don't find the prerequisite, then there's no point in going ahead with the task, and we have to relook at the task and find some other less demanding task which will enable the child to be ready for this game at a later point of time. Okay, it's not just that the child who is not able to do now will not be able to do this game at all. Okay, so the next thing that we have to understand, teach the child, is the rules of the game. Is it clear so far, whatever we have discussed? Can we move on? Yes. Yeah. So we had worked on, when I'm teaching a game, what are the prerequisites? Is the child ready to learn that particular game? And what are the components that are involved? And what is the demands in terms of understanding, the cognition? Okay. Now we're looking at the rules of the game. Okay. When you're looking at the rules of the game for snake and ladder, so the child should be able to roll the dice, and then the child has to identify his own coin or counter, and then the child has to count and place the coin in respective number. Okay, which means many times what we see is the child who is on 4, when he rolls the dice 2, he has to go to 6, but they may come back to 2, because it's 2 on the dice, right? So that is something that child has to understand. So count and place the coin in respective number, and then move forward. So they have to move towards the target, which is again in ascending order towards the higher number. And then we are going to teach them the purpose of a ladder, why they have, what they have to do, and what is the advantage of having a ladder, and purpose of snakes. And snake is kind of a disadvantage, and then they have to learn to take turns, and they also have to understand winning and losing. Okay, these are some of the rules of the game for snake and ladder. This is very specific for snake and ladder. So is it clear so far with this particular slide? Is it clear? Please type C. Yeah. So some principles whenever you're teaching any board game would be, one, add one rule at a time. Okay, if I talk about cricket, how does the batsman get out in cricket? If somebody catches a ball, the ball, okay, that has been hit by the batsman, is out. He can get out by bowled. They can get out by run out. There's a stumping. There is a hit wicket. Okay, there's a leg before wicket. What will happen if I teach all this on the first day of the game to the child? Do you think the child will be able to understand and focus and follow? No, right? So when you start with any game, always start with one rule at a time and make sure it is the most important aspect. Okay, and child will obviously lose interest because it's too much information for me, and I'm not going to make much meaning out of it, right? So always add one rule at a time, and add that match the rate of learning of the child, which means if the child has understood that particular rule, then you add one more rule. If the child has not understood that, the child is not consistent, then do not add the second rule. Okay, so that is the first principle that we have to look at when you're teaching a board game. And always remember, we are looking at 80% accuracy. Okay, It's not 100% accuracy. When it comes to children's special needs, we're looking at 80% accuracy, which means 8 out of 10, the child has to do it. Okay. And if the child, why that 1 or 2 is because sometimes child is not focused. He may not be looking when you're actually, when the ball is coming, so he may not attempt a catch and all of that, right? So it depends on the other factors also. There are other external factors which can also play a hand on that. So always add one rule at a time and make sure child has learned that particular rule and is consistently following it before you add the second rule. Start closer to the end for instant success. Okay, so it's almost like this 100-meter race. You should start from 90 meters for the child, so that he has to run just 10 meters and the race is over. Okay, so when you start with that, there's an instant success. That success will give motivation. So the other day I was asking a parent who came to my clinic and told them about this concept of instant success. How will you teach carom board to a child? Okay, and he said, like, I usually put all the coins in the center like the way we do and ask the child to hit this. That's not going to work. Okay, because this is going to take a long time for the child to understand, like, how it's going to when it's going to get over. But you should start with only one coin, keep it very close to the pocket, and then I encourage the child to hit it. Yeah, and sometimes I would also encourage that you can hit it close, keep the striker also closer to the coin and allow the child to hit it. Okay, and let the child understand that the primary objective is to put the coin inside the pocket. That is the primary objective of this game. Okay, start with something which is so easy for a child to understand, and once they are able to get that feel of success, they are more interested in playing the game, and gradually you can add more rules and make it more complex. Is that clear? Yeah. Simplify rules for compliance. Okay, so whenever there are complex rules, okay, always simplify them. Okay, depending on, I'll show you an example of all of that. I have created my own snake and ladders game. Okay, step by step, which I'm going to show you after this presentation is over. So simplify the rules for better compliance, which means right now only bold is out, nothing else is out. Okay, only bold is out. So you have to simplify the rule. Okay, and then make sure the child is able to understand. If it is too complex, don't go for that. And I'll probably, there are a few games which we can discuss about after this. And identify levels. It's always easy to break down these things into levels so that you understand. Like if I go back to the earlier slide about the rules of the game. So if I can look at this and say these are different levels of the game, what level the child is? Is the child able to identify his own coin? Is the child able to roll the dice? Is the child able to count and place coins? So he's at level 3. Okay, he's not able to move towards the target. So that is the level that he needs to training right now. This need not be linear. You can go for other things as well, but just an idea that when you look at different steps involved in that, it becomes easier. Then we are able to exactly focus on one particular point. So whenever you are going to play the game with the child, we are going to teach the child that at that particular level. And then you can, now because we are using the board game as a goal, okay, and the goal cannot be achieved by doing the same thing again and again. Okay, if you want to improve your standing balance, you cannot just do standing. Okay, if you just do standing, you're not going to improve your standing balance. Okay, if you are trying to do well in chess, okay, if you just play chess, I'm not saying playing chess is not required, but if you just do only that, it's not going to be enough. Okay, there has to be a cross training. There have to be similar skills that are required in some other game will help in improving this particular game. Okay, so that's what I mean by cross training. So teach similar skills in other games or in other activities. This will help the child to generalize. Okay, when we talk about color concept, what is a color concept? When I talk about color concept versus shape concept, which is easier for the child to understand, color or shape? Which is easier for child to understand relatively, color or shape? Easy for child to understand? It is the shape. It is the shape which is easy for the child to understand. Why? The shape is constant. Okay, color is not constant. Okay, because when I look at a shape, it is a triangle. It can be smaller or bigger. It is still a triangle. Okay, but when you look at a color, there's no particular form for a color. Okay, it can be a chair, it can be a table, it can be a phone, it could be a pen, right? So there has a different form, and as you see, children have a language delay. So what is more important, they start depending on the sense of vision. Okay, and so when the visual information gives me so much different ways of doing it, it becomes difficult for me to understand. And many times we see that if you teach a child, if a child is able to stack the rings from bigger to smaller, okay, and then what will happen is the child will be able to do that, and then you say take the green color, blue color, the child will do perfectly well. Okay, but if you give another set of toys and ask him to take a green color from that, the child will not be able to do. Okay, why? Is because you will find that the child has actually memorized the name of the ring with the color. Okay, so child would do, if you say blue color, the child thinks blue color applies to only this particular object, that is a blue colored ring. Okay, so the child will, you will assume that the child has learned the color, but the child has not learned color. He has learned here, he thinks that it is the name of the ring. Okay, and when you give him a new toy and ask him what color is this, he will not be able to say, or he will give you all the wrong answers. Now what is happening is there is no generalization. This is very particular, set very particular to a particular activity, and that is what the child has understood. So he has learned it more as a factual memory rather than generalize it. So when you start teaching skills in other activities, if I teach that this, the red color can be a tray, it can be a ball, it can be a chair, and then there is something common in all of that, that is the concept. Okay, and that is what leads to generalization. And then teaching turn taking. Turn taking can be taught during, thanks for the Eureka. Turn taking can be taught during the game, okay, and which can also be like, you can use some strategies, like you can have a stick of power. What do I mean by that? You can have any stick, it can also be a scale, but just use some color tape or your gift wrapping paper and all of that, and try to make it look a bit more flashy. And so whenever the person has to play, his turn comes, you give that stick to him. So he should hold the stick on one hand and then roll the die. After he has rolled the die, then he gives the stick to the next person. So what is happening? The child is now able to visualize turn taking. Whoever has the stick, it's their turn to roll the dice. Okay, it can also be just passing the dice without the stick. It depends on the child's level of understanding. You can also use this turn taking skills for doing other things. For example, whoever has the stick, it's his turn to go on the slide. Whoever has the stick, it is his turn to talk now. Others have to be silent. Okay, you can do all of that based on the child's level of understanding. But what it does, it helps the child to visualize it. And as I had always been telling you, that a child with language delays tends to depend a lot more on vision, and so it makes it easier for a child to understand the demands by visualizing it, and then you can add those words which will help the child to understand, and we can stop using that stick of power. Yeah, thank you. And the other thing that we have to understand is, when we are trying to teach a particular board game to the child, whatever is readily available there in the market may not suit the child. Okay, again, it all depends on the child's level of understanding and language processing, attention, everything plays a role in that. So that's where we can talk about this teaching learning materials. So what is TLM? It's just generally, it's something which special educators do all the time. Okay, special educators create materials, okay, for the children to interact and learn. Okay, so because there is there's some lacuna, some distraction out there in the market. I'm still trying to find out if I can find a cup set. You have a stacking cups, right? You put one cup inside the other. Every stacking cup has something in the bottom. It is either a shape, it is either an animal. I'm still trying to find out if I can find a stacking cup without any of that, because it's a big source of distraction. Okay, so what is happening is, when you are not able to, if the child is not able to learn, it's not just enough that we do all the changes in terms of simplifying the rules and all of that. Sometimes, or most of the times, we also have to modify the material so that the child is able to understand, because there's not much distraction. Okay, if there is only one just like you get on a bus. Okay, now you get on a bus which is partly crowded. There's only one seat available. The moment you get in the bus, there's only one seat available. You go and sit there happily, right? But if you are just getting to sit on a bus in a terminus where the bus is yet to start and all the seats are vacant, you will go to and sit in one place, and then you realize, no, the footrest is not probably good here, or it's quite sunny on this side. Let me go and sit on the other side. You keep changing that, right? When there are multiple options, or it can be a potential source of distraction. So very similar to that, if the materials are complex and they are or the one which is readily available in the market may not suit the child because it's probably too much of information, and the child has to have access to modified materials. Please type TLM if you're clear with this. Okay, so sometimes we have to create our own materials. Yeah. So the advantages of using a unique or customized material would be it makes it clear, it's easy to understand. If the child is able to customize, you can always customize the material according to the level of the child. And then you also have a visual model helps in retention, because now you're able to see what it is. As I told you, it also helps in language delays. You can make it more interactive than what it is right now, and then you can also use certain tools as a means of measurement what the level the child is. I'll show you all of that when I show you the example of a snake and ladder game. Okay, and some common use of TLM would be we use storybooks. You can be handwritten books as well, or you can just take printout. It can be strips of paper, and then you can look at manipulatives. You can have like building blocks. Now I was talking about stacking cups. Okay, and if you want to teach ascending and descending order, you can use the bigger cup has a bigger number, the smaller cup has a smaller number. Okay, so then you can show that 5 is bigger than 4 or 10 is bigger than 2. You can use that. So what happens now, the stacking cups has become a teaching learning material because you've used it to teach ascending order or big number and small number. Okay, so you can use something like that example. Yeah, I'll come back to that question. Videos, again, you can use as a way of TLM because now child is able to see it, and then you can use some games which are very similar, and then you can do that as well. And then you can talk about flashcards. Now, for example, if when you take a game like Monopoly, then you will find that snakes and ladder plays, it helps the person to play Monopoly, right? They have very similar demands where you have to know numbers, you have to throw a dice, and then you have to move the counters. But it's important that for a child to be able to play Monopoly, he should be able to play snakes and ladders. So you'll find that some games itself becomes a precursor to a higher level game. And then you can use flashcards and all of that. Somebody has raised a hand. Let me finish my session, and then probably, or you can just put your question or something that you want to say on the chat box. And then you can, when you talk about snakes and ladder, you can customize the board, you can customize the dice. You can have dice with numbers rather than dots. Typically, we have only dots. Okay, and so it's now child has to count, add the number of dots. Now 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's 4. So now I have to move 4 paces. It's too demanding for a child. It would be nice if I have a dice with directly the number written on top of it. Okay, so what we do in the center is we buy a big dice. Nowadays easily available on Amazon. You buy a dice which is like 1-inch die. It's quite big, and on top of that I stick a sticker. I put a number on top of it. Okay, that's how the child can. It becomes easy for a child to understand. And cards and if child is not able to roll the die, it's because either a child does not have the motor planning or some difficulty in the use of hand, you can have cards with numbers like flashcards. Like just like we have playing cards, we can have numbers 1 to 6, and then we can shuffle it and then ask the child to pick one card. Okay, or child, if the child is verbal, the child can say, I'm going to choose the 4th card and we choose 5th card, and then when you, it is all turned face down. Okay, so the child does not know what number it is because we want that element of luck in the game. And then once the child is able to, you turn the card, you will find it is 2 or it's 6. Yeah, so based on that you can go. And then you can instead of coins or counters, you can also use some child's favorite object which is small enough to be accommodated in the board. That is something that can be done. Or you can have pictures. Now I can have something like a very tiny picture of the child himself, or his favorite cartoon character. Okay, so the child understand this is my coin and this is dad's coin or mom's coin. Okay, you can use all those things to customize it so that it becomes easy for child to understand. Okay, let me share a sample of snakes and ladders. Okay, so all of you able to see my slide on snakes and ladders?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now this is adapted snakes and ladders. And as you could see, we have made some adaptations to this. Obviously, one is that I was talking about the dice with numbers rather than the dots. And then we have an adapted uh, board as well. Okay, let me take you through the adaptations. So this would be, as I told you, think in levels. So I've just put that into different levels. So level one would be, it starts with start. Okay, and that's where you have to put all your coins, and then it's going to be numbers 1 to 6. And I've tried and tested all of this in my clinic. Okay, so once you roll the dice, if it is 4, you have to take it on the place it on the 4. Initially, I used to keep it in the center, the number written on the center. But when the child puts the coin in the center, child is not able to see the number, and that's why I put it on the top left corner. Okay, and so child understand that this is where my coin has to go. Child has to now, what is the child has to do is to correlate the number on the dice with the number on the board. So this is level 1. Is the child able to do that? And then I have 6 in a different color because that is the maximum number possible. And then the next level would be no numbers. You have to count and keep it. Level 3, I'm going to increase the number. But here what you see is instead of the straight numbers, because I cannot have a straight and keep it smaller, I have wanted it bigger. So I've gone into a model of S, and from bottom to top. Okay, that's how the game goes. We don't start from the top to the bottom. So green is the starting point, red is the ending point, and I have a path to follow. This is level 3. Level 4, I further increase the numbers, and now it's numbered because the child has to still, as I told you, from 4 to 6. Even if it plays throws a 2, you should go to 6 rather than going to 2. So that's how you go from one number to a higher number. Again, to increase it, you see as the complexity increases, you go to numbers, and then I start with ladder. And here I made some customization. As you can see, the ladder starting point is in yellow box. The ending point has a red color font. Okay, so this is clearly telling the child if you come to 19, you have to go to 27. Okay, so we are again modifying the material according to that. And then I introduce a concept of snake. Again, the snake starting point is blue color, ending point is red color font. Okay, that is your level 6. And then level 7 is you start combining both snakes as well as ladders. You retain the yellow and blue color, and then you find that after 48 there is the winner zone. So after 48 you throw 1 or 2 or 5, you enter into the winner zone, because that is a more complex part of snakes and ladders. If you're in 100, or if you're 98, you have to score 2. If you're 99, you have to score 1. So that is something different. So here we have increased the numbers, combined both the snake and ladder, and then introduced a winner zone. Size of the bottom step going up gets narrowed. Okay, I'm not very sure. Okay, you talk about the amount of it which is covered, is it? Yeah. Okay, and then I've removed all the colors in this, which is your level 8. So there's no more yellow and blue color. And still it continues with. So there's one change, one step at a time. Okay, and then I've gone till 50, and now at 45 onwards, I've mentioned available chances. Okay, 45 it is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you score a 6, you don't have a chance from 45. So for every number, the available chances have been mentioned, so that it becomes very clear for a child to understand what is the allowed number on the die, and then on 50 you win. Okay, so this is I've broken it down into 9 levels, and as you can imagine, it could also, like, you can also break this into 18 levels or 50 levels. It depends on the child. As I'm always telling you that after level 1 it's level 2, or level 2 it could be after level, for some children could be level 1.1 and not level 2, right? So you can still break it down, but this gives you a fairly comprehensive idea of how we can proceed with the snake and ladders game. Okay, and now taking this as an example, You can also use it for other games as well.